Okay, so we are on page 21 of the Phaedrus, and I think this is the last video I'm going to put up today, the last in the series. But we are barreling through page 21, and the only thing we have, well, I guess we're not barreling through, we're at the top of 21. But we're at the top, well, all we have to do is page 21, page 22, and page 23. Page 24 only has a little bit of stuff on it, and then we're done. And you guys have paper 1, 2, and 3 to write, so keep an eye on those assignments and see what you can get to me. I realize it's crazy. Just get me things when you can. All right, so let's do this last video and look at this section. So Socrates in here, just to kind of recap real quick, he says at the bottom here, as the proverb says, may not the wolf, as the proverb said, claim a hearing? Meaning, shouldn't we listen to our opponents, the wolves? And so he says, let's hear, what do you think Lysias would say if he heard us talking about how you have to know the truth and you have to know souls? And he says Lysias would think it was stupid. And so I'm going to kind of back up a little bit. And Lysias, will argue that there's no use putting a solemn face on these matters or going round and round until you arrive at first principles. For as I have said at first, when the question is of justice or of good, it's a question of which men are concerned who are just and good, either by nature or habit. And he who would be a skillful rhetorician has no need of truth. For then in courts of law, men literally care nothing about truth, but only about conviction. And this is based on probability, meaning believability, to which who would be a skillful orator must give his whole attention, right? So if you're going to give speeches in court, you got to talk about what's believable, not what's true, because you're trying to get a jury to believe you. And sometimes people don't believe the truth. And they say also that there are cases in which actual facts, if they are improbable, ought to be withheld. And only the probabilities should be told in either accusation or defense. And that always in speaking, the orator should keep probability in view and say goodbye to the truth. And the observance of this principle throughout the speech furnishes the whole art. That's the whole skill. He's just, for people like Lysias, they just care about what's believable. And actually, if something is true but not believable, don't say that in court, says Lysias, because court is about convincing juries to believe you. And so Lysias would say, just say shit that sounds believable, man. But instead, well, let me tell you about this crazy thing. No one will believe you about your crazy thing. No one's going to buy it. And so Socrates says, Lysias would say, and just like I ask you to do, I ask you to imagine. Notice they don't go find Lysias and interview him. They just imagine what he would say. And it's the same thing I want you to do in your papers, which is imagine what somebody who disagreed with you would say, and then respond to them. So now Socrates has imagined what Lysias would say. And Phaedrus says that is what he would say. He says that's correct. He says that is what the professors of rhetoric do actually say, Socrates. Like, this is correct, dude. I have not forgotten that we have quite briefly touched upon this matter already. With them, the point is all important. So, like, they really do. And every time he says probability up here, he means believability. Because if something is probable, it's likely, it's believable. Okay, so Phaedrus says, well, he says, you're imagining what Lysias would say, and Phaedrus says, this is 100% what Lysias would say. This is correct. And Socrates says, I dare say that you are familiar with Lysias. Does he not define probability to be that which the many think? Well, certainly he does. So same issue, and there's another guy also who says the same thing. Socrates says, I believe he has a clever and ingenious case of this sort. He supposes, and he's going to give an example, just like I ask you to do, he's going to give an example of Lysias, which is another guy like Lysias, another dude who just gives speeches. He says, I believe he has a very clever and ingenious, meaning a really interesting case of this sort. He supposes a feeble and valiant man, valiant means brave. He supposes means imagines. He imagines that a weak but brave man has assaulted a strong and cowardly one and to have robbed him of his coat or something or other. And he is brought into court, and then Lysias says both parties should tell lies. The coward should say he was assaulted by more men than one, and the other should prove that they were alone and should argue thus, how could a weak man like me have assaulted a strong man like him? The complainant will not likely confess his own cowardice and therefore invent some kind of, or a lie which his adversary will gain the opportunity of refuting. And there are other devices of this same kind. So the issue here is they're imagining. It's an example. from his imagination. Tisias, like Lysias, has a crazy example. I know it's a little long and complicated, but it's basically what he's just was saying is like, imagine some weak dude beats up and robs a big strong guy. Well, how did that happen? Because the weak dude is brave and the strong guy is a coward, right? So imagine a situation where some little skinny weak dude just like beats up and robs some huge guy. But the huge guy is a coward, and so he lets himself get robbed. Then they both go into court together. Now here's the thing. Nobody on the jury the jury is gonna take a look at these two dudes and they're gonna go, there's no way that little dude beat up that big dude. Um, and so the lawyers, because they're never going to believe that, even though that's the truth, right? The truth is this little brave guy beat the shit out of and robbed a big coward. But nobody's going to believe it because the jury's going to look at these two guys and they're going to say, somebody's lying. There's no way a skinny little dude who's weak could beat up a big strong guy like that guy. And so what do lawyers do? Lawyers tell lies because the jury's not going to believe the truth, right? The big guy, for example, is not going to want people to know that a little dude robbed him because it's embarrassing. So he's going to say, I got robbed by more than one person. And the little dude is going to be like, I didn't rob that guy. Look how small I am. That's not even possible. So the point is this is an unusual situation, right? It's unusual that a little tiny guy would beat up and rob a big strong guy. Because it's unusual, it's the truth, but it's unusual, people won't believe it. And so in order to make their argument in court, everybody is going to be telling lies because the jury won't believe the truth because they're never going to believe a little skinny dude beat up a big strong guy. And Lysias and Tisias and all of these guys that are mentioned in this speech, in this part of the book, they're primarily thinking about making speeches in court. Now, our job, I'm primarily talking about writing essays for your other classes, but Socrates is talking about people making speeches in court. But it's the same thing. You're using words to convince people to agree with your thesis statement. Now, in court, your thesis statement is, that guy's guilty, or your thesis statement is, I'm innocent. And in an academic paper, your thesis statement is, Plato is correct because, right? And so Socrates gives this whole example about telling lies. He says, am I right, Phaedrus? And Phaedrus says, certainly. And Socrates says, bless me, what a wonderfully mysterious art this is, which Lysias or some other gentleman, in whatever name or country he rejoices, has discovered. Shall we say a word to him or not? What shall we say to him? And here we have another big paragraph. Now, I think I'm going to save that paragraph for next time, but the point is that Socrates, what shall we say to him? Remember at the top of page 21, Socrates was saying, shouldn't the wolf have a hearing, right? Shouldn't we listen to our opponents? Okay, let's imagine what our opponents would say. And then he does. And notice, by the way, he gives his opponents a big block, right? This whole thing is what Lysias would say to him. And then they discuss that a little bit. And then down here, he says, well, let's say something back, and Socrates does a whole big thing. This is what I want you to do in your paper. Same thing Socrates does, which is, what would someone who disagreed with you say? And then you do a whole paragraph. And then you say, okay, now, what are we going to say back to him to explain why this guy is wrong? And then you have a whole paragraph doing that. And this is what it's amazing to me that the same things I'm asking you to do in school are the same things Socrates was asking people to do 2,500 years ago. Socrates 100% does this. It's a really smart way to make your argument, which is to consider what an opponent would say and then respond to them. And that is exactly what Socrates is doing here. So, guys, comment on the blog below. Let me know you're alive. I'm noticing, looking at some statistics, some like website statistics, more people are looking at these posts than are commenting. If you are looking at these things, please leave a comment so I know you're alive. If something is going wrong with the comments, please email me the comments. I just would love to hear from you out there. I know this is a crazy time in America, and honestly, I appreciate you going through this thing with me. If you're watching these videos, I couldn't be more impressed. We are doing really well. We are in the middle of page 21. We're going to get to the middle of 22, the middle of 23. By the middle of 24, we're done. We have 3 pages to go. 3 pages, and we are done with this entire goddamn book of philosophy. Thank you for doing this with me, and I will see you guys on the flip side.